Welcome to the Empowered Flow podcast. I'm Tris Alexandra, holistic clinical nutritionist, women's health and menstrual cycle educator, and mama. Join me and experts in nutrition, fitness, mindset, and holistic healing as we explore conversations to open your mind to a different way of thinking on all things women's health, hormones, periods, cyclical living, and fertility. Whether you're seeking knowledge, inspiration, or a supportive community, you've found your tribe. Let's dive in. Hello. Welcome back to another episode. It is Tris here for a solo episode talking all about healthy, sustainable fat loss for women. Now, I'm going to talk about why calories in versus calories out, or the whole eat less, move more doesn't work. I'm going to share with you why macronutrient ratio is key, and also the importance of micronutrient density. Essentially, why a calorie is not a calorie. All calories are not created equal. I'm going to talk about why we need to address hormones to enable fat loss, essentially removing the handbrakes that can inhibit us from being able to lose weight or make it very difficult, the impact of stress and sleep, and then my top tips for long-term sustainable fat loss. So I thought I'd also start by sharing a little bit about my experience, my story with dieting, weight loss, weight gain, because when I share, I guess, the research and what works when it comes to healthy, sustainable fat loss for females, I have personally experienced what this is like. I've done the dieting, I've done paleo, I have done fasting, I have done keto, plant-based. I have been really obsessive over clean eating, and I'm not to say that any of those things either don't work or potentially don't have a place when it comes to your health journey. But I think when it comes to fat loss, we well and truly overcomplicate things. And I think what I see most and what I've experienced as well is we tend to major in the minors, and we focus on all the things that don't move the needle and forget about the actual really big fundamental things that make a really big difference to long-term fat loss success. And the first one of those is focusing on calories in versus calories out. And I know there are people that will argue about this and say you just have to be in a calorie deficit, you just have to eat less and move more. And let me tell you, when we focus on calories, or we focus on just the weight on the scales and watching or seeing that number go down, what I see is women ending up with a preoccupation with food. So like continually just thinking about food, looking at the clock for their next meal. It can become really consuming. They end up with fatigue, with hunger, with cravings, mood swings, energy slumps, and even like a fear of foods. And it can really be disruptive to their relationship with food. And I know for me personally, well before I was a nutritionist, during my 20s, I had a really tumultuous relationship with food. I used it to control things when I didn't have any control of things going on in my life. I feared eating certain foods. I went through that, quote unquote, clean eating phase, particularly after I was diagnosed with PCOS, because I was trying to heal my body and support my hormonal health. And I was worried about everything that went into my body, which just created so much more stress and made things so much worse anyway. But that's what I see when we put the focus on calories in versus calories out. And when we think about it, when we're looking at like just being in a calorie deficit, just focusing on weight loss and the number on the scales, we're actually not aiming to lose weight. We're aiming to lose fat. And in order to lose fat, we need to eat in a certain way that supports fat loss, that supports lipolysis, so the burning of fat in our bodies, and supports our metabolic health. Now, a lot of times when women are trying to lose weight, there is underlying metabolic issues going on, particularly women with PCOS and insulin resistance, but often there's, inflammation and other things that are creating metabolic issues. So being told just lose weight, or focusing on just losing weight to fix the underlying metabolic problems that is causing you to gain weight or making it difficult to lose weight, is really putting the cart before the horse. So when I work with clients, when it comes to fat loss, we are working on the underlying causes that are either contributing to weight gain, making it very difficult to lose weight, things like hormonal imbalances, inflammation, insulin resistance, working on that metabolic health, so that we are essentially removing the handbrakes that are making it very difficult for you to lose weight in the first place. And yes, absolutely, our nutrition and the food that we eat, and yes, calories do matter. Food is number one when it comes to fat loss, absolutely number one. But I don't approach it from a calories in versus calories out, or needing to, track your foods or anything like that. We approach it from a health perspective first. I want you to think about also, if we talk about calories and just consistently being in a calorie deficit. Now, if you say you're eating, 1,500 calories, or you've gone on this diet and you're eating 1,500 calories and you're so focused with the amount of calories that you're eating, and maybe at the start it's helping you to lose weight, you're seeing the number move, and then all of a sudden you plateau and you've been eating 1,500 calories for a while. So the argument then would be, well, you're no longer in a calorie deficit because your metabolism's changed, so you need to drop your calories again. So then you drop them down again and again and again. And suddenly you're finding yourself on a 1,200 calorie diet or less. And then your weight loss plateaus again. Where to from there? Like, it's really unsustainable. If we are constantly just focusing on being in a calorie deficit and consistently dropping the amount of food that we're eating, where do you move from there when your weight loss plateaus and then you can no longer sustain being on such little calories? And also, being on such little calories means that your body is not getting the nutrients that it requires for all of these organs to function, for your thyroid, for your metabolism, for your hormones, so many different things that need to function in the body, your metabolic health, in order for you to be able to lose weight. So I know it sounds really counterintuitive to focus on health first and not focus on calories, but these are the reasons why. The other thing I mentioned is we're not aiming to lose weight, we're aiming to lose fat. Because if we're talking about our total weight, we're also talking about not just the fat loss, but we're also talking about muscle and fluid and glycogen storage, so carbohydrates that are stored in the muscle and liver. And I can tell you from personal experience, and I've seen it in clients and seen it in many, many women, is that we could weigh the same or a very, very similar scale weight and have completely different body composition and look completely different. So the goal is fat loss. The other reason why that's important is because our muscle mass maintains our metabolic health. So the more muscle you have, the more glycogen storage. So there's more space for carbohydrates, for sugars from the blood to move into. It improves our metabolic health. So our goal is always fat loss. We want to maintain muscle as much as possible. And that's why, coming to my first point about macronutrient ratio, that's why macronutrient ratio is really key. Because, so when we're talking about macronutrients, we're talking about the protein, carbs, and fats in food. And the ratio of protein, carbs, and fats that we eat are really important when it comes to fat loss. When we're looking at protein, for example, and I just talked about muscles, we need the adequate amount of protein for muscle maintenance or to build muscle, to maintain muscle. We lose muscle from our mid-30s onwards, and this rate of decline increases significantly in perimenopause if we're not prioritizing ways to build and maintain it. And when we lose muscle, we are impacting our metabolic health, our metabolism, our rate of metabolism, which really impacts the amount of food that we eat to sustain our weight. So macronutrient ratio is key, and our protein intake is key. Protein is also really important for satiety. So when you are going through a fat loss phase, you really want to feel satiated. You don't want to be constantly hungry and constantly craving foods. And protein is really satiating. It helps us feel fuller for longer. It also balances our blood sugar levels, which is really, really important. Now, blood sugar balance, so key for hormonal balance, so key for metabolic health, and so key for fat loss if that's a goal for you. When our blood sugar levels are balanced, we get nice, consistent energy throughout the day. Now, when our blood sugars are unstable, or we're eating in a way that doesn't promote stable blood sugar levels, we get spikes and dips of our blood sugar levels. So when blood sugar spikes, we get a release of insulin, which is not a bad hormone at all. It actually helps to move sugar from the bloodstream into cells to create energy. But when we are chronically and consistently elevating blood sugar levels, getting too much insulin being released, this is what leads over time to insulin resistance, and that causes a lot of metabolic dysfunction, which makes it really hard to lose weight. So we really want to utilize both protein and our ratio of macronutrients to keep our blood sugar levels stable and make it a lot easier to lose weight. Now, when we talk about the amount of protein that we should be consuming, there are numerous studies on this that show that higher intakes of protein help to improve body composition and help to improve weight loss and fat loss. The amount we're looking at would be around 1.8 grams to 2.2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight daily. So if you are a 60 kilo woman, you would be looking at, around 120 grams of protein would be 2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight per day. That may sound like a lot to some of you. It is probably a lot more protein than most women that I see are consuming. The other interesting thing about protein that women should know is that during our luteal phase, when progesterone rises, we actually need an adequate amount of protein because progesterone breaks down protein to provide amino acids as the building blocks for the uterine lining. So we need protein to mitigate any losses or any uses that the body is utilizing for a lot of things, not just muscle mass. Now, protein isn't the only important macronutrient. We've also got carbohydrates and fats, and both of those macros are energy providing for the body. You can lose fat consuming both carbohydrates and fats. You don't need to give up carbs. You don't need to give up fats. It is really dependent on the person to how your body will respond best to both of those macronutrients and how much you will need. That's dependent on a lot of factors, but one of those being your insulin sensitivity, so your metabolic function, really. If you are more insulin sensitive, your body can tolerate a lot more carbohydrates, and if you have insulin resistance, you'll probably find you do better reducing those carbohydrates until that insulin resistance is reversed. I also find, though, for women, particularly women that are cycling, so still have an active menstrual cycle, we need some carbohydrates because carbohydrates are really important for our thyroid function, which in turn sets our metabolic rate. So don't think you need to completely cut out carbs. We just have to be a little bit smart with the types of carbs when we're utilizing them. Like I like to utilize them specifically around training, sometimes even in the evening to help with sleep. But we do need to be a little bit particular about the types, when we're consuming, and how much we're consuming. So let's move on to micronutrients, because a nutrient-dense diet is really important for both optimal health and for fat loss. And I will say that a calorie isn't a calorie. They're not all created equal. What I mean by that is your body will respond to 100 calories of sugar completely differently than it's going to respond to 100 calories of protein. The impact those calories have on your hormones, so hormones that control your appetite like ghrelin, leptin, insulin, and cortisol, and then the flow-on effect that will have on your other hormones is significant. Now, if we are eating 100 calories of sugar, particularly on its own, I talked about how that can spike our blood sugar levels, create a lot of insulin. We end up with a blood sugar roller coaster. It signals fat storage. It impacts our appetite control, and it creates inflammation. So you can see just there how that would create a state that is going to make it really, really difficult to lose weight. And it's also going to impact those like cravings and hunger and everything that actually makes, going through a fat loss phase really difficult in the first place. Now, the other thing about nutrient density is I mentioned our body requires so many nutrients to function. All of our organs and systems rely on the nutrients we get from food. If we think about just our thyroid for a moment, which impacts our metabolic rate, the thyroid needs selenium, zinc, iron, iodine, copper, tyrosine, which is an amino acid, all of these nutrients that we get from food. And when we are consuming too little calories, if we're on these, crazy 1200 calorie diets, the body is simply not getting enough nutrients in to support metabolic function and all of the other functionings of the body. The other thing, when I mentioned about creating that state of inflammation depending on the types of foods we're eating, is that we then get chronic activation of the immune system and systemic inflammation, which leads us down the path of weight gain and chronic diseases. So if we're not focusing on a diet that is really micronutrient dense and is like anti-inflammatory in nature, then it's going to make it really difficult to lose weight. When we focus on, and if you are trying to lose weight, like reducing inflammation is key, because we are then able to restore metabolic function. We're allowing the body to efficiently process foods and maintain our energy levels. And we're reducing that inflammation that causes it to be really difficult to lose weight. So an anti-inflammatory style diet would look like, quality proteins, nutrient dense plant foods, smart carbs, healthy fats, lots and lots of antioxidants and fiber for gut health as well, and reducing the inflammatory type foods, so refined carbohydrates and sugars, seed oils, processed foods with all those additives and preservatives, food intolerances, where you can, looking at spray-free or organic produce, so we're removing those like herbicides and pesticides in food. So let's talk about why we need to address our hormones to enable fat loss, because essentially our hormones can be like a handbrake that makes it really difficult to either lose weight or contributes to weight gain. And if we're not addressing them, then we're essentially like having one foot on the handbrake, one foot on the accelerator and expecting to go somewhere. When we remove those handbrakes, we are enabling the body to lose weight. And removing those handbrakes means addressing those underlying hormonal issues and those underlying causes that are contributing to weight gain or making it difficult to lose weight. All of our hormones, we have numerous hormones, all of them have some sort of impact on weight loss or fat loss. So from appetite control, so insulin, cortisol, ghrelin, and leptin, we need to be able to control our appetite in order to not have that like preoccupation of food and hunger and fatigue that is going to make it really, really difficult. And then we have other hormones like our thyroid, which sets our metabolic rate. Now, if you have an underlying hypothyroid or slow thyroid function, which I see subclinical hypothyroid in clinic a lot. And what I mean by subclinical is so many women will have their thyroid checked by the doctor, either not have all the adequate thyroid tests done, or they do have some of them done, but they're told that everything looks normal because they're not being diagnosed with hypothyroid, but they have a like borderline slow thyroid function or subclinical hypothyroid, and they won't be told about it until it actually moves into that pathological state where it can then be medicated. Now, a subclinical hypothyroid or hypothyroid will make it really difficult to lose weight because it essentially means your metabolic rate is really low, which means that you need to consume a lot less calories and be in a really, really difficult calorie deficit in order to lose weight. Now, our thyroid is a really adaptive organ and it responds to our environment and environmental input. When we reduce our calories, reduce our energy intake, over time, our thyroid hormones will slow down and our metabolism will slow down. There's nothing wrong with you. Your metabolism's not broken. This is essentially trying to keep us alive, right? Because if you think about if we were, had very little energy availability, our body would need to be able to survive on low energy availability. So it slows down metabolic function. That's all great when we went through those periods of feast and famine, but when we are in our modern lifestyles now where we consistently have access to food, that kind of doesn't happen. But when it comes to dieting, if you have a history of chronic dieting, or if you are constantly eating very, very little calories and your metabolism has slowed down, it's going to make it really difficult to lose weight. So we essentially need to address thyroid function and support your thyroid function and thyroid health to help with weight loss. The other hormone we need to consider is insulin, which I spoke about as being part of appetite control. I also already mentioned about insulin resistance. Now, insulin resistance is the most common driver of weight gain, and I work with a lot of women with PCOS, and 70 to 80% of women with PCOS will have some level of insulin resistance. So we need to address insulin resistance. Now, also for women with PCOS, we do need to address the other underlying hormone imbalances, in particular androgens and testosterone, because both of those hormones in excess will increase fat storage, particularly around the middle. So always addressing those hormones. Estrogen. Estrogen is another one we need to address because estrogen is stored and secreted by adipose tissue. So when we have increased weight gain, we get increased estrogen storage, which further promotes the storage of fat. Now, I shared an episode, my last episode was on estrogen dominance, and I talked about weight gain being one of the symptoms of estrogen dominance, but it is like a vicious cycle. So we need to address excess estrogen in a number of ways in order to help fat loss to occur. Now, I spoke about androgen hormones before in relation to PCOS, but for any woman on hormonal birth control, there are certain types of the pill, the NuvaRing, Mirena IUD, and the Nexplanon implant that do have androgenic or testosterone-like progestins in them, and they can contribute to insulin resistance and weight gain. So just something to consider when it comes to your birth control. And then lastly, when we talk about hormones and weight loss, is our menstrual cycle. Just our menstrual cycle in general. The reason being is that if you are doing the same thing throughout your menstrual cycle, it is going to make it really difficult. In the luteal phase, so from ovulation until your next period, when progesterone rises, progesterone increases our metabolic rate. So it means that we are going to feel hungrier. The body is actually needing more calories. And that's just something to consider if you are in a fat loss phase, because if you aren't eating enough in the luteal phase because of that increase in metabolic rate, you are going to find yourself really hungry and potentially really fatigued as well. So let's move on from hormones. I also want to talk about the impact of stress and sleep on fat loss, because two really big lifestyle factors that can make it really difficult to lose weight or contribute to weight gain. When we're talking about disruption of sleep or sleep deprivation, we are seeing a dysregulation of blood sugar control even from the very next day after one night of poor sleep or sleep deprivation. And that means increased insulin output. And that means over time, if you're chronically sleep deprived or not getting quality sleep, we're looking at insulin resistance. Now, I don't know about anyone else, but if you have ever had a night of sleep deprivation or a really poor night's sleep, tell me that the next day you didn't crave carbs, sugars, lots more food, because I can tell you that I absolutely do, and we see that in the research as well. That is partly because of that blood sugar control, but also because the body's really tired. It's looking for energy, which means you're getting more hunger and more cravings to help the body get the energy it needs, really. There was actually a study that showed that even acute sleep loss in humans leads to a gain in fat mass and a loss of muscle mass due to a disrupted circadian clock that dysregulates our metabolism and dysregulates metabolism in adipose tissue, and also decreases the structural proteins in skeletal muscles. So we've seen it in the research, and we see it in life when we have a really poor night of sleep. Stress is the other one. The impact of stress on fat loss can come in numerous ways. One of those being excess cortisol production or chronic cortisol production. And then that cortisol essentially triggering cravings and hunger. So don't underestimate the power of sleep and stress reduction on your ability to lose weight. So with all that in mind, I want to share with you my top tips for sustainable, healthy fat loss for females. I think it can be really easy to overcomplicate things, especially with thinking about I've got to consider my hormones and my blood sugar and all of these things. The practical side of things is a lot more simple. And I say simple from, I guess, a nutrition strategy point of view, not necessarily from an emotional and mindset point of view, which I haven't even touched on here, which is a whole nother component if we think about the emotional side of eating and our mindset and being able to do it all consistently. I've really just focused on the nutrition strategy side this episode. One of my earlier episodes, actually, if you want to talk about like emotional eating and the mindset behind that, there was an earlier episode with Mira Claudia. I can't remember the number. I'll link it in the show notes, but we talked about the emotional side of eating. So that's a really, really good episode for that. Anyway, back to my top tips for fat loss success. So number 1 would be to focus on a protein and fiber-rich breakfast. I want you to aim for a minimum of 30 grams of protein in your breakfast. That is going to set up your day. It is going to keep you satiated. It is going to keep your blood sugars stable. It is going to get you on track to providing the amount of protein that you need. And if you focus on that and do it consistently, you will find that the rest of your meals will kind of fall into place. I often say if we focus on protein, don't worry so much about the carbs and fats. Everything else just kind of falls into place once blood sugar levels are balanced, because you get better hunger and satiety signaling. So breakfast, lots of protein. Number 2 would be strength training. And I spoke about the importance of muscle mass for our metabolic health and insulin sensitivity. So strength training 3 times weekly at a minimum to help build muscle mass, maintain muscle mass, and also improve insulin sensitivity and metabolic rate. Number 3 is giving up alcohol. And I didn't touch on this before, but alcohol, just consider it. Giving it up, reducing it, just consider it. Alcohol inhibits lipolysis, which essentially is the burning of fat for fuel in our body. It also impacts our sleep, and let's be honest, we are more likely to make poor food choices after we have had a few glasses of wine or whatever your alcohol of choice is. Not to mention the fact that alcohol is 7 calories per gram on its own without creating any satiety or anything like that. Number 4 is an anti-inflammatory style diet. And I spoke about what this looks like before, but essentially we're looking at quality proteins, lots of plant foods, so vegetables, fruits, getting in a lot of those antioxidants and fiber, and reducing the inflammatory foods. So refined carbs and sugars, seed oils, processed foods, all those additives and things in our food system that are so rife in our food system that we just don't need or could really do with reducing. And then the 5th one is to cycle between periods of fat loss phases and maintenance. So not constantly in a calorie deficit, not constantly trying to lose weight. This will help to improve your metabolic rate. It will help to maintain muscle mass, or you can build muscle mass in between. And it's also a lot better for your mindset and your relationship with food, which are really, really important. Lastly, we can also, I just had another thought, but we can also consider supplementation. Now, there is no magic pill for weight loss or fat loss. There is no supplement that is going to magically help you lose weight. However, there are absolutely many, many supplements that we can use to support and address the underlying handbrakes, like I talked about, to support the hormonal imbalances, to support our thyroid, to support, insulin resistance or PCOS. So there are so many supplements. It's really going to be dependent on what your underlying drivers are. I like to look at things like magnesium is a really great one because it also helps with carbohydrate metabolism. If you've got PCOS, myo-inositol is really important. If you have insulin resistance, we're looking at something like berberine, and liver support like choline. If there's inflammation, we could be looking at omega-3s. If it's a thyroid, there's zinc, selenium, iodine, iron, tyrosine, copper, all of those nutrients that help the thyroid to function. That is not to say that you need all of those supplements at all. I always look at food first and supplementation absolutely on top of that. And then also, we can also look at some plant medicines on top of that as well. The last thing I wanted to say is that play the long game when it comes to changing your body composition. If you are wanting to lose fat, lose weight, play the long game, because we are bombarded with messages about lose this many kilos in this amount of weeks. But the honest truth is you need to take a holistic health first approach when it comes to fat loss, and play the long game when it comes to supporting your metabolic health, your hormonal health, your gut health, and a healthy weight will be a side effect of that, rather than focusing just on calories like we are generally told. So I hope that's really helpful. Now, lastly, if you are looking for more support with your nutrition and your health goals, in October this year, so later this year, depending on when you're listening, I'll be running my online program, Your Hormone Reset. This is really to help any woman who has tried it all or who is feeling like they've fallen off track. It's really about simplifying your nutrition and lifestyle with the right choices that are going to balance your blood sugar levels and hormones, kick cravings, lose the bloat, boost your energy, and support fat loss, all whilst enjoying nourishing food. No counting calories, no needing to lose your social life. This is really about setting you up for hormonal balance and fat loss success. It will include recipes, meal plans, education, and group accountability and support. I think that is the biggest one, because whenever I've worked with clients, whenever I've run group programs, having a handful of women that are cheering you on in your corner, and myself as a nutritionist in your pocket, basically, having that ongoing support and accountability through the program just makes it so much more successful. So I'll be sharing more information about that program. You can head to my website, trisalexandranutrition.com, if you want to find out more about it, and we will be kicking off in October. Thanks for joining us on the Empowered Flow podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, I'd love you to share it with a friend and take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. Your support means the world and fuels our mission to empower women everywhere. You can also reach out to me on Instagram at trisalexandranutrition. Sending big love. I'll catch you in the next episode.